This is the Court Leader's Advantage, a podcast series for court professionals and by court professionals. Brought to you by thecourtleader.net and in cooperation with NACM, the National Association for Court Management. Employee hiring is at a crossroads. With artificial intelligence, AI, revolutionizing the way resumes and applications are screened, employers, including courts, are rethinking how they identify top talent. At the same time, the push for greater diversity means evaluating candidates from vastly different backgrounds using a common set of standards. And that's not all. Courts are grappling with severe staffing shortages, struggling to find candidates who not only have technical expertise, but also the interpersonal skills to navigate high-stakes legal and personal matters with litigants and families. I'm Pete Kiefer, and welcome to the Court Leader's Advantage podcast series. This month, we'll explore the dynamic tension between the quest for increased diversity and the need to keep evaluations unbiased. We'll discuss the quest to find a balance at a time when artificial intelligence is potentially changing the very rules for selecting new talent. Here to discuss this issue are Credell Webb, Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer for the Philadelphia Courts; T.J. Bement, Court Administrator for the 10th Judicial Administrative District in Athens, Georgia; Elizabeth Moss, Human Resources Director for the Alaska Court System in Anchorage; and Sarah Kajwowski, Manager of HR Talent Strategy and Management for the State Court System in St. Paul, Minnesota. Thank you all for joining today's podcast. Think back to the last time you served on an interview panel for a management or supervisory position in your court. What were the one or two factors that made the candidate you ultimately selected stand out from the rest? What specific skills or experiences did they show that set them apart? T.J. Bement?
When I looked at this question, kind of what came to me up first is that note about a managerial or a supervisory. So I want to make the distinction that, when I was hiring or am hiring in the past for line staff, it may be a different skill set. So when I'm looking for that next level, when I have the folks in front of me, assuming that they've already passed that initial screening, and I'm having that conversation with them in the interview, I'm really looking for those soft skills around being, personable and approachable and engaging. And I know, folks, whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, that's going to manifest itself in different ways. So, certainly trying to peek below the surface on that, but really looking for folks that have those soft skills, because at that point for a management level role, we're already sort of assuming that they've got that base level understanding of the job or the things that they need to be doing. So I'm looking for those skills on how to manage and supervise people. So I'm looking at what are those human interactions? What are those past experiences that they have that they're going to be able to build on? Or if they don't have as much of that experience, do they have sort of that je ne sais quoi or whatever about them that we can build upon that and really turn them into a good manager?
Credell Webb?
And I have to agree with my colleague, TJ. I'm looking at, do they have the knowledge, skills, and abilities to perform this particular job function? It's a supervisor or a manager. So I want to know, do they have good communication skills? How do they resolve conflict? What has been their track record? So when you're hiring a supervisor or manager, you're also thinking about developing the types of interview questions that you can get those responses from. So you may ask them about how they've previously dealt with a conflict, or you may ask them a question that's hypothetical. How would you deal with this type of conflict? And then the second part of that question is, okay, so now how do I decide between the two? You're really going to have to look at who gave you the stronger interview. And that's also going to be based on what that job requires. So there are some management and supervisory roles that you predominantly need someone who's good with people and good at customer service. You have some roles where you need someone who's good with people, but also a little bit more technical. So that's going to play a role as well. How much of that technical knowledge do I need? And you have to weigh all those factors together to determine who's going to be that top pick.
And Pete, I want to add one kind of thing at that sort of post interview, if I can. So We have not always put a lot of faith in the sort of looking at their references of individuals, and sometimes references are often done by the HR department or folks who are not the ones that are making the hiring decision. I'm always a fan of doing those myself, at least for the final number of candidates, the top 1, 2, or 3 for a management or a supervisory level position. Because I think really talking to those references really helps you sort of suss out some of those nuances that sort of Creedell mentioned as well. And I found asking a very direct question to say, hey, Mr. or Miss Reference, I'm considering hiring this person for this kind of role, knowing them and having worked with them in the past. Do you think that would be a good fit for them? And I know certainly within the HR world, we're not always supposed to answer that question if we're on the receiving end of that reference. And sometimes that can be very telling in itself. But the ones that do and did have a great working relationship with their previous position or previous employer, they're going to shine no matter what. And those previous supervisors are going to share and really talk about how wonderful a candidate that is. So I think that reference check process is a really good opportunity to look at some of these knowledge, skills, and abilities a little bit deeper.
Many organizations now use AI to scan applications for key terms like coached, inspired, resolved employee conflict, problem solving, and curiosity. However, savvy applicants can strategically include these buzzwords even if they don't fully reflect their experiences. Even if your hiring process doesn't involve AI screening, how do you ensure you're identifying truly qualified candidates rather than those who have simply optimized their resumes to pass the initial screening? Elizabeth Moss?
Yeah, so here at the Alaska Court System, one thing we do is our interview questions that we use are very open-ended. So, the candidate really has to provide the details. Another thing that we have done is after the interview has finished, we send practical exercises that have scenario-related situations to the employees. We give them 75 minutes to complete it. We ask that they not use AI. And then we try to see if they can demonstrate the writing skills we're looking for, the ability to think quickly, their approach to problem solving, and things like that. And this has really been helpful for us with the practical exercises to really hone in on which candidate we think has the best skills.
Sarah Kojawski?
So at the Minnesota Judicial Branch where I work, we often conduct phone screens, just 15-minute quick interviews to get more information, to really kind of talk through the resume and get information from candidates to see if they really are qualified for the position. We don't receive so many applications that we can't review all of them. So we do review every single application that comes in. I took a look earlier today. Our average number of applicants right now is around 20. So some positions getting more than that, some getting fewer. But it's pretty easy to go through 20 applications for a position and determine, if without using keyword searches and stuff like that. So that's been really helpful for us. And then we do behavioral-based interview questions. So we do ask, similar to Elizabeth, what kind of scenarios, tell me about a time where you did that. And we give them the STAR method. That is describe the situation, describe the task or what needed to be done, what was the action that you took, and what was the result of the action. And if they can't respond with a scenario or come up with a situation, then we kind of can glean that maybe they aren't as qualified for the position that the resume might look like it is. Sometimes we'll also give 15 minutes for candidates to review the questions before the interview. We don't always do that, but that can kind of give those introverts a time to collect their thoughts and come up with thoughtful answers, but not too much time where they can really, spend time making something up or researching an answer. So that's been really helpful for us. When the candidates go through and talk about the scenarios and they're struggling, we might prompt them or ask follow-up questions just to really help them through it if it's, a problem for them when they're interviewing. But that's been really helpful. And the candidates who simply can't come up with a scenario, again, probably aren't qualified for the position.
As organizations prioritize diversity, How do you evaluate a candidate with extensive trial court experience versus one from a different field, such as the nonprofit sector or private industry? What criteria do you use to determine whether their skills and experiences are transferable to the court system? Riddell?
Peter, I think you have to consider the type of position you're hiring for. So I want to start with the job descriptions as well as the job advertisement. So if, let's say, for example, you're hiring a court clerk, where it's predominantly customer service that they're doing, and there are a few things that you can train them on that are technical. I would say you could have individuals who work in a variety of customer service roles that would be a good fit for this position. Now, in order to make sure that you're reaching out to a diversity of candidates, you're going to have to make sure that your job advertisement is listed a number of places, whether that's through different colleges and universities. It could be through veterans, people with certain abilities, and you're making sure you're casting a wide net. And then be very intentional about developing your interview questions. If you know, for example, that the job is going to, on the other hand, require a lot of internal court knowledge, more than likely you're going to need someone who's worked either at your court or another court. You have to be honest about that and understand that the person that's coming in with the trial experience is going to have a competitive advantage. Now, I am a big proponent of fair competition. I think if someone can meet the minimum knowledge, skills, and abilities required to perform that job, let them interview. But just know that if you don't have that trial court experience and the other person does, it may serve as a disadvantage. I do think when it comes to transferable skill sets, you're going to have to really determine what that job role is and what the individual is actually going to be doing while on that job. Because, for example, if you are supposed to know about, let's say, a particular court software, that only court professionals know how to work that software, and it would take a long time to train someone, I don't know how well those skill sets are going to transfer from someone coming outside of the court system. And maybe there are some instances where you may want to advertise that position internally. You're not really going to reach out to a diversity of individuals if you do it that way. Or maybe you think about PORA. So the National Center for State Courts has a portal whereby you can advertise your job descriptions. And so that's a place that you can consider posting the position.
Beth?
Yeah, some of the things that I agree with Cordell, looking at their knowledge, skills, and abilities, understanding if they have the ability to really think analytically, attention to detail, the strong communication that is so needed in the court system, their decision-making skills, and also their problem solving. Some of the things that we do is if we are just going off their knowledge, skills, and abilities, and we're going to interview them, we may ask them about their previous work experience and how it could relate. We give them the position description and say, help us understand how your previous role could relate to this position description. And that's been helpful too. Also, just looking when you talk about, nonprofits and private sectors, did they do, for instance, case management in the private sector, and what would it look like in the court system from an administrative function standpoint? Also, we really try to help share the court's mission and our pledge of fairness with the candidates so that they understand, that it's more than just your skills. It's what you have to bring internally to really present yourself as a member of the Alaska court system. And Cordell was also talking about, the diversity, and we've done many things, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, but, reaching out to different groups, as he said. One of the things that we've done is a lot of our locations are rural, which are off the road system. And so we've really gone to links such as joining Facebook groups for that little village or town and posting flyers there and things to really try to expand the network that we're in.
Years of experience, certifications, and degrees are easy to verify, but assessing a candidate's problem-solving skills and ability to mediate employee conflict can be more challenging. What strategies or interview techniques do you use to determine whether a candidate truly possesses these skills rather than simply is overstating their past experiences? TJ?
Thanks, Pete. I have an example when I think about this one. A number of years ago, was hiring a number of probation officers for a new probation office. And so we had quite a few positions to fill. And I think luckily at the time, we cast a wider net. So we did decide to interview some folks who, based on resumes, in a more traditional sense, we might not have interviewed. And what came of that was a really good group of individuals that did have degrees in criminal justice or social work or the things that sort of check the boxes that got them through the initial HR screening. But what really came to be most important was in the interviews was the scenario questions. And I think a couple of our folks on this call have referenced that as well, that those scenarios of, what would you do in a situation like ABC? Or if X, Y, or Z were happening, what would you do? And I give the example of one of those individuals who has gone on to do really great things, no experience in the courts, had the right background degree, but her experience was in a management trainee program at the local big store at the mall that she decided wasn't for her, and then had been a bartender. And those scenario questions about how do you deal with conflict and how do you deal with, certain, high stress, environments. And she was going to be a probation officer. She's like, well, let me tell you about the person I confronted that was shoplifting in the store. And let me tell you about the times when I was behind the bar and I was dealing with a drunk patron or an individual who was hitting on me. And I'm like, so these high stress, high drama sort of situations. And had she explained, it was like, that's exactly what we need. We need somebody who can think on their feet and who knows and has a good problem solving skills and looks at that from that perspective. And she's gone on, beyond that position and has continued to exceed beyond expectations in other roles because she just had a really good skill set that was readily transferable into, the court system and dealing with people and managing conflict. And to this day, she is still a human breathalyzer. And so that has always been a great asset to her when she was in the probation role because she knew when people were using. So really helpful is to just look at that and use those scenario questions to really, see what those skills are that people possess.
Sarah?
I also think that roles can be transferable, and if they can come up with examples, I find that it's most helpful if they can give a specific example, and that's we prompt that, like, okay, give me a specific example. And if they don't have one, then you can go to what do you think you would do in this type of situation? And then we've been prepping our hiring leaders to understand that roles are transferable. You don't have to have court experience for every single job. You're not going to have the candidate pool that you might want if you're only looking within. So that's really important for them to kind of think about that. And what they really are looking for is the competency or the knowledge, skills, and abilities rather than that particular court-related knowledge.
A manager may never face a crisis, but if they do, their response can be critical. Situations such as an armed individual in the courthouse, a bomb threat, natural disaster, or a public health emergency requires composure, quick thinking, and sound decision-making. How do you assess a candidate's ability to stay calm under pressure, act decisively, and make the right choices in a high-stakes situation? Beth?
Yeah, Peter, one of the things that we do is going back to the practical exercises that we talked about is really honing in on those particular things. Also, another thing that we did with some of our in-court positions is when we interviewed them, we played a victim impact statement and allowed them to listen to it. And as they listened to it, we asked them, to take notes like they were in courting. And then we watched their reaction as they listened to it to see, did they get stressed up, or, did they look like, oh my goodness, what is happening now? Or were they calm? And I think those are some other ways that we can really hone in and make sure that we are ensuring that someone can stay calm in those high stress situations. We also had a situation here at the court system where we had an employee that took their life. They weren't at work, but they did, and they also took another family member's life. And we sometimes will share part of that scenario and ask them as a manager, what would they do in that situation? How would they communicate it? Because it was a learning experience for all of us at the court system when it happened that day. And so just having those real life experiences that you can share and ask them about.
Credell?
Thank you, Peter. So the interview process is very limited. I mean, I take the notion that I'm not really going to know how you will respond in a crisis until I see you there. But I do think there's an opportunity to ask questions. So we spoke a lot about these hypotheticals and scenarios. So one, let's think about behavioral interview questions. These are when you assess actions and reactions that a person has had in a specific job or previous job before. So you may want to ask some questions surrounding this. Have they ever been in a situation where there was a crisis, and how did they respond? You can also look at situational interview questions. Those are a very similar type of interview question, except you're asking now a hypothetical. If there was a crisis, how would you respond? Because maybe they've never been in the situation, but they can respond to a hypothetical. And another thing we have to think about as court systems, are we providing training? I know, for example, our court has an active shooter training. So this may be something we want to think about, because even if the person answers the question and they give you the best answer in the world, I've had this situation before, and also here's what I would do in the situation. But when it happens, we don't really know. And so I think an additional question we have to ask ourselves as court systems, are we providing training so that way our managers, supervisors, and leaders are equipped? Because these can be very difficult things to deal with. And potentially you can answer the question and give us everything we want to hear. But when the time comes, I don't necessarily know that your answer to one of my questions is going to be a real indicator of how you'll respond.
What advice do you have for court professionals trying to broaden their court's applicant pool and are faced with the challenge of evaluating disparate candidate backgrounds? TJ?
Yeah, Pete, I thought about this one for a while, and in particular in the last couple of years, because at least down here, we've had a lot of hiring challenges. Not a number of candidates to apply, and then within those, not stellar candidates, at least from what's coming through our application systems to what comes to us on the hiring end. And then ultimately that leads to individuals that aren't interested in the position, or accept the position and don't show up, or show up for a day or two and then don't show up on day 3. And so I think we as an industry and the courts in general need to be thinking about broadening our horizons. Because again, at the lower level positions, I want somebody who's got good customer service. I want somebody who can speak with the public. I want somebody who can manage a low level of conflict and that is going to have a great work ethic. I can teach the courts. I can tell you about what we do in the courts and why the courts work is important. It's harder for me to teach you to have good customer skills. So really looking to say, can we take off some of those requirements that might be some of those background things so that we can broaden the pool and really get really great hardworking individuals who might not have considered work in the courts, but once they're here, I think I can get them to enjoy the work in the courts.
Beth?
Yeah, some of the things that we have done is, thinking outside the box. For so long, it's been, we have our NeoGov that, our applications go into, and we just do that. And so we've really, over the last couple of years, tried to really expand that and think differently. Anything from, we've started doing Indeed postings. I talked about the Facebook groups some, but really immersing ourselves in some of the social media aspects, LinkedIn, Twitter, well, I guess it's X now, and some of those things to really provide flyers and promotional information about our positions. Other things that we've done is in some of the smaller rural locations is, we've even gone to like the one grocery store in town and hung flyers there, kind of getting back to the old fashioned way, but it seems to have been working. Attending job fairs, we've really started honing in on going to high schools and really talking to those junior and seniors. Not that they can come to work for us now, but preparing them to let them know what the court system is like. So when they do graduate, they know that's an opportunity. One thing that we found is a lot of people think, okay, I have to have a law degree to come work at the court system.
Yeah.
And so really, letting people know that that's not necessarily what we need sometimes. We don't always have to have a law degree. And then one of the other things that we have really started doing is opening our courts to invite the public in. Come see what we do. Let us show you the great work that we're doing at the Alaska court system. And we've actually got employees that way. And it's just so important that we think differently. We don't just think about how we've always done it. So those are some of the things that we've done. One other thing that we are looking at, especially with some of the rural locations, is what work can be done remotely from another court location. So can we hire someone in Anchorage to do work for Ukqiavik and things like that? Because some of these locations are so small that there's just not a lot of people there, and so really looking at, is there an option to do something at a different courthouse remotely?
Credell?
I have to agree with both of my colleagues. I think that exposure to the court is very important. Some people have never stepped foot in the courts. They don't know what to expect. They may be afraid to put a job application in. So as much exposure as you can give individuals, especially at like the high school level or college level, is going to be great. I always like to take it back to the job description. Sometimes we have to update these job descriptions that may be outdated. And my colleagues have touched on this a little bit, determining, do we still need that particular degree for that job? Do we still need that particular speed in which someone types when we now have things like text or speech to text? We have to think about how technology has changed over time. So after we rework our job descriptions to make them accurate, then let's think about, where are we advertising the jobs? So I think Elizabeth spoke about this. Hey, I'm even putting up flyers in certain places, advertising those jobs in places that are going to have a wide reach, and being open to not just electronic advertisement. Also, some of us work in HR roles as human resources, but some of us do not. So you may want to familiarize yourself with some of the resources that are available. So for example, the Society for Human Resource Management has free tools online for different types of recruiting. So for example, they have an Employing Abilities at Work certificate. So it talks all about individuals with disabilities, the value that they can bring to your workforce. And although you take the class for free and you get a certificate, it also gives you places where you can recruit those individuals. They have a similar certificate for Veterans at Work. So you'll learn about that particular demographic, and then you'll find ways that you can recruit that demographic as well. And I also seen, in some instances, apprenticeships making a comeback, so be open to those things. We a lot of times think about students, you have the college students, which is great, and you have high school students, but you also have working adults who may not have went to college, but if you have an apprenticeship program, maybe they can come in and learn under someone and then eventually get the job. That way they're getting the training that they need. So we also have to consider the bandwidth that we have at our courts for training. And Peter, this goes back to some of the questions you had about transferable skill sets. Sometimes that's going to depend on how the bandwidth that your court has for training. If you know that, okay, this person is stellar, they have done all these great things, and now we have an excellent training program, so we can bring this personality on board because we know that they can become a true star player, like the person that TJ hired. If you first think about okay, we have a bartender, and then we're thinking about the adult probation and parole. I mean, initially I was thinking, what's the connection? But as you started to explain the connection, it made sense to me. But also in the back of my mind, I'm assuming they also had a good training program to make sure that the employee was brought up to speed. So that's going to become very important in those instances. And I think if we do all those things, we are going to have some more diversity in terms of the candidates. And I know there's some confusion about when people say we're looking to get diversity. So we don't then say, now that we have diversity in the applicant pool, we're going to give people additional points. No, everybody's going to compete fairly, but we just want to make sure that we're getting those individuals in the applicant pool so that way they can interview. And once they interview, it's going to be competitive.
Sarah?
Hey, and I agree with what everyone's saying. A couple additions. One fun thing that we've been doing is bringing our job opportunity information to the Minnesota State Fair. And that really does reach a huge population, and they love it. They love meeting, the judges will come, they love meeting the judges. But then they also can see that this is also an employer. So think about, we have QR codes that they can click with their phone and look at that. So that's important. The other thing we really emphasize is job equivalencies for the minimum qualifications. So most of our positions do not require any type of degree. And even the ones that kind of do, if you have experience that's related, we demonstrate in our job promotional information and our job postings that there are equivalencies and this is what that might look like, so that people feel that they are qualified to potentially apply for our positions. That's been really important. The other thing that we do is we have been resourcing our judges with brochures and information, because they are often in high schools and in the public. And if they have those handouts right there that are designed and beautifully presented, they can hand them out and reach a bunch of people that maybe HR wouldn't even have the opportunity ourselves to reach out. Also, we've been doing some virtual information sessions, kind of virtual job fairs, and that is great for working individuals who don't have time to come to an in-person job fair. So I would recommend those as well. And then finally, I wanted to talk about internal development, because we want to retain our staff. And if we can create internal development opportunities for them, then we're less likely to have that turnover. So you might have someone who started as a court clerk, we call them court operations associates, and they can rise through the ranks and take so many different career paths, whether it's within court operations, if they are interested in finance, what do they need to do to get the skills and be prepared to be a viable candidate for whatever career path they want within the branch. And we show, we have conversations with leaders who have taken non-traditional paths within the courts to show them what a career path could look like versus just that standard step that you would normally go in a career path. And that's been very helpful too.
I want to thank TJ, Beth, Cordell, and Sarah for their valuable insights regarding artificial intelligence, the need to maintain unbiased evaluations, and the quest to seek increased workforce diversity. As AI continues to shape our hiring practices, it's critical to refine the selection process to identify the best candidates, those who truly possess the necessary skills, rather than those who just know how to game the system. As always, I extend my thanks to you court professionals tuning into today's episode. Whether recruiting, selecting, or managing court staff, you approach every task with dedication and professionalism. Thank you. Join us on Tuesday, May 20th, for another episode exploring the challenges facing our courts. This has been the Court Leaders Advantage podcast series. I'm Pete Kiefer, and thanks for tuning in today. Thanks for joining us today. The Court Leaders Advantage is a regular podcast series on courts and court administration. Today's episode will be available on our website, on the Court Leader website, on YouTube, Facebook, iTunes, LinkedIn, and on X, formerly known as Twitter. Become part of the conversation. If you have questions, comments, or ideas for future episodes, email us. Our address is podcasts@nacomnet.org. Did you hear an interesting comment by one of the panelists that you would like to listen to again, but you don't want to search the entire episode to find it? The additional resources section of the webpage has a question time marker sheet. Find the discussion question on the sheet, and next to it is the time that question was asked. You can quickly fast forward to that time and listen to the panelists' comments. Remember, if you don't have time to watch an episode, you can always listen to the audio version. Listen in your car or on the bus on your way to or from work. You never have to miss an episode. I'm Pete Kiefer, and on behalf of our guests, the Court Leader website, and the National Association for Court Management, thank you, and have a great day. The views, information, and opinions expressed during this episode are solely those of the host and the individual presenters. They do not necessarily represent the position of the National Association for Court Management.